Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This Week in San Diego Soccer History. I'm John Cross, along with Dylan Wilson. And Dylan, how are you doing this evening?
I am doing all right. I ordered myself a pair of Birkenstocks a while ago. They were on sale. Finally showed up. My feet are feeling good, John. My feet are feeling good.
That's good. Yeah, I don't think I have ever owned a pair of Birkenstocks in my life.
Well,
I've
they
owned
have some
sandals, different
random
sandals,
sales
but
on
not
random colors.
Birkenstocks.
Highly
Yeah,
recommend. Yeah.
I highly recommend. All right, I may have to consider that. Um, Anything new and exciting for this last week since our last episode,
Other than the
other than the
Birkenstocks,
Birkenstocks?
um, no, probably Tottenham won back-to-back games.
Yeah,
That's
I was
cool.
gonna say
Yeah.
it has to be Todd. I was trying to set you up
Yeah.
for that one.
Oh, no, yeah. Well, yeah. It's still kind of, but yes, that's been nice.
It's close. You're walking a tightrope
I
there.
was trying to focus on the Birkenstocks over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, I getting a little excited again, as we've mentioned before and other times. I loosely follow Bradford City because that was my father's team, and they are in the promotion playoffs. They won promotion last year from League One to League Two, and now they're going to try to get into the championship. So uh, we will we will see how they do. I'm hopeful, not terribly expectant. I mean, they could definitely make it, but I think that also is a big leap for them to go to League One to championship in 2 years. I you're torn because you almost hope they can regroup a little bit and then move up and not move up too soon. But if you miss your opportunity of moving up, you may not get it again for many, many years. So
Yeah.
um, there's no guarantee that that you could just sit back and it's automatically going to happen next year. So I'll be trying to catch those games here over the two-legged series and see if they make it to Wembley for a chance to go up to the championship. But for local soccer news, don't have too many things I guess that I've been doing lately. So I don't know, maybe we should just jump into our show here. Uh, since we don't have a ton of stuff to talk about between these last two episodes. Do want to get into our trivia episode from our trivia question, sorry, from last week. So let me go ahead and pull that up on the screen for the people who are watching. And last week at the end of the show, to get ready for the topic of this week's podcast, we asked how old was Ferenc Puskás when he joined Real Madrid? So Dylan, I can't remember if we actually spoke about this after the show. We might have to you know
I
discuss the
don't
actual answer.
I don't recall. If we did, my guess would have been wrong though. I'd have guessed younger.
What would you have guessed?
I'd have probably guessed mid-20s. That's when and I'll say too that with the benefit of hindsight now that I'm looking at the real answer, I think that's maybe a bit of a modern lens just because that's when players tend to be at their peak in the modern day and go to clubs like Real Madrid. But I think something I'd also fail to account for, and you'll have to tell me if I'm correct in assuming this maybe played a part in it, is this would have come off the back of two world wars. And so maybe he was a little later in his career when he made this move than some other people might have been, if not for continent destabilizing political issues.
I don't know how much that's played into it. There are some other factors that definitely played
Yeah.
into it. I'm not aware of whether that did necessarily or not. But let's go ahead and pull the answer up on the screen. So the correct answer is 31. And I think that's surprising to a lot of people that I think when most people think back or what they know about Puskás usually is about it's a little bit the Hungarian national team, but I think a lot of it has to do with his tenure at Real Madrid. And I think for the success he had, which we're going to talk about some of those successes that he had from basically age 31 to age 39. So I think even at that time, you're still on the, um, you know, you're not in the prime of your career. And he definitely had some great years in his 20s. And we'll talk about some of those as well. Because that's what we're trying to do in this episode is get ready for this podcast that we're doing on when Ferenc Puskás came to San Diego, like we did our Pele episode a few weeks ago when Pele came, but he came as a player. Puskás came as a coach, and we want to talk a little bit about that event. But I think before we are able to talk about that event, we really need to understand the quality of player that Puskás was. And I think for a lot of people, especially here in 2026, and especially someone who's come to the game, well, not come to the game, maybe come to the game later, but definitely someone who's younger also might be aware of the name Puskás, but not really aware of the player. Just like I think a lot of people nowadays might be aware of the name Pele, but not terribly aware of the player, especially as more time goes by. And I had a lot of fun digging into this because there were things that were new to me. So that's always fun and interesting, and I'm excited about talking about it tonight. So, um, you ready to get started, or do you have any questions or comments before we actually jump into our stuff about Pushkas?
Yeah.
Because I think we're pretty much going to jump into it today. Skip some of our other sections because I think this is going to be a rather long topic since we're doing a little history of Pushkas before we get into when he came to San Diego.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think a lot of more modern fans might know the name from the award given to I think the most aesthetically pleasing goal is what we
Right, the most
found.
beautiful goal.
Right.
Right.
So, not necessarily the best goal, although it has more or less come to mean that. So, that is named for Ferenc Puskás, if anybody was wondering.
Yeah. And yeah, I guess let's just go ahead and jump into our main topic today. On really ultimate, what we want to get to is when Puskás came to San Diego. But like we said, let's do a bit of a deep dive back into Puskás and his career. First of all, he is probably the first big international star. He was at least a good decade before Pele when his name was around and was popular, um, at least I don't want to say a household name necessarily because we'll talk about some of that in a second. But he probably was the first big international superstar. I would strongly recommend if you are a person who has never seen Puskás play before, any videos, you can go on YouTube. There's lots of little highlight clips out there, and watch. He is, to me, amazingly silky smooth and has tremendous ball control, an excellent first touch, great ball control, composure on the ball, his ability to quickly change directions and wrong foot his opponents. Um, it just, especially inside the penalty box, it just easily just almost dancing around people and making people just slip and fall and then slotting home a goal. And he was equally adept at just slotting a ball easily into the corner as he was having a rocket of a shot from outside the penalty box. So tons of clips out there so you can see some of his skills, but it is, um, and obviously these are the best of the best, but we do that with all our great players. But his ability to slip by people with the control of the ball is impressive. And again, probably the first big international superstar. We have an award named after him for goals. So goals were a big part of Puskás's history. He scored 84 goals in 85 international matches for Hungary. He played in both the Hungarian and Spanish leagues, where he had 514 goals in 529 matches. I mean, almost every one of these you see, he's almost a goal per game, or in some cases, slightly over a goal per game. But that's what he was good for in terms of goals. He holds the record for the third best like goals per game average in the European Cup, behind Gerd Muller and Jose Altafini at 0.85 goals per game. So that's a record that still holds today. Depending on who you look at, because different people calculate statistics a little bit differently, and where one game may count in one person's tallying of goals, someone else may not. he scored somewhere between 725 and 802 career goals. And then that puts him, again, depending on the list, somewhere between fifth all time and seventh all time. And on the one he's fifth all time, he's only behind Cristiano Ronaldo, Messi, Pele, and Romario. And of active players who might have a chance of closing in on him, Lewandowski is the only one who's super close at 696 goals and is someone who's still playing. And Luis Suarez is the next active player that I saw at 602. Just to give you kind of, where he sits among even some more modern players. He had 8 times he was the top individual scoring leader for his league, 4 times in Hungary, 4 times in Spain. One of the years, though, in Hungary, he was actually the top scorer in all of Europe. And those years in Hungary were mostly in his 20s, and the years in Spain, as we said, were into his 30s. But he wasn't just known for assists. And now I remember I forgot to do the trivia question that we were supposed to open this with, so I'm going to bump that trivia question in here right now. He is, at the moment, today in 2026, he is the fourth best assist leader in international football at 53 assists. So, all his assists for Hungary. So he had the record at 53, and it stood for it stood for about 50 years, that record of 53 international assists. So our trivia question that we were supposed to ask before we started this segment, let me go ahead and pull it up, is, and we won't answer it till afterwards, but name the player who broke Ferenc Puskás international assist record. So the assist record was 53. He set that. It stood for 53 years. In 2013, it was broken. Just to give you a little hint, but the person who broke it had 3 assists in an international match, which of those 3 assists were able to tie and then break the record held by Ferenc Puskás. So what we want is which person broke Puskás's record in 2013, and we'll give that answer when we get to the end of this segment. So before we go further, Dylan, I'll just ask, do you have an idea of who that player might be?
I mean, I have some guesses. I can tell you they're not right because I can see the answer. But yeah, I mean, you mentioned 2013, so that kind of gives you a ballpark range to work with right there. And so my train of thought was just who are the best national teams around that. So you think Spain, Netherlands, Portugal, who were those teams big passers, assisters? So I would have guessed somebody like, Iniesta, Xavi, maybe Wesley Sneijder, somebody like that. So my guesses would have been kind of in that range.
Yeah, and I don't think bad guesses necessarily, just off the top of someone's head. As we said, he's currently the 4th best. So this person broke it in 2013, and that record has since been broken by 2 other people. So there's 3 people that sit above Puskás right now. We'll go through the answers to all of that at the end of the segment. But my big point is I wanted to make with Puskás, even though we have an award set up for him for goals, he was a great creator of goals as well. This is, I think, one of the aspects of his game that's usually, I don't know about lost, maybe forgotten a little bit because everybody focuses on the goals. But I think that combination of being deadly with that final pass to someone, as well as deadly with the final touch and scoring, really is what set him apart from a lot of players. So if we look overall, according to Opta, he has a grand total of all matches 374 career assists. And I won't say who he's behind because I won't give any clues necessarily for the answer, but we can cover that stuff when we do the assist answer at the end of the segment. A couple other miscellaneous things that he played. Also, we thought about doing this as a trivia question, but I thought against it. Not only did he play for Hungary, and we'll find out why this happened a little later, but he also played 4 international matches for Spain. And over the course of his career, he won 10 National League titles, 5 in Hungary, 5 in Spain, and he was named to the world's best 11 in 1960, 61, 62, and 63. Those were all during his years with Real Madrid. And then before we get into kind of his history, the last thing we'll mention is the Puskás Award, which we talked about. That was created in 2009 by FIFA, given for the most beautiful goal, right, of the calendar year. So we are very familiar with the Puskás Award, and now that we have the Marta Award as well to complement that. But that's kind of a little background on some of Puskás's accomplishments. But now we're going to dig a little deeper into more of a timeline, kind of going through his story. So before we do that, do you have any other comments, Dylan?
I just didn't realize the Puskás Award was that, or was at least named that recently. I guess I did know that, but you think of it as one of those things that's been around for a long time, and it is just weird to be reminded that I've been paying attention to football longer than it's been around, and it doesn't feel like that.
Right. If you would have asked me, I would have guessed, I don't know, probably before 2000.
I was going to say I'd have guessed like mid aughts at the very latest, and that
Yeah.
would have been like not an honest guess.
Yeah. I just, when again, digging through these, as we said, when I look at some of the dates and things, it just, you know, like the 2009 for the award, like, I can't believe it's only been that long that we've been honoring people with the Puskás Award. All right, well, let's go ahead and jump in a little bit timeline, kind of Puskás's life story, and bring us then up to this night where he is in San Diego coaching the Vancouver Royals. So Puskás was born in 1927 on April 1st. His father was also a footballer, and Puskás played for the same team in Budapest. You're going to have to help me with some of my pronunciations, Dylan, if you can, but I think Kispest was the original name of the team, but it was then taken over by the military. So even though he's listed as two different teams, it was the same team. They changed their name to Budapest Honved, and because it was the military team, it allowed the military to go and conscript good players to have them on the team, and then that became the dominant team in Budapest. And if you've ever heard the phrase the galloping major for Puskás, that's where that comes from. Major was his rank in the military there in Hungary. So he played for that team. He started playing, I believe I saw as young as 12, but I also saw something that I wasn't able to quite get enough confirmation on, that he played under a pseudonym to get around some of the age restrictions, because people knew his father and knew the name and kind of knew how old he was. So he had to play under a different name to get around some of those age restrictions, because he was good until basically he was of age to play under his own name. So I wasn't able to get a lot of verification on that. But I don't know if you've heard anything about that, Dylan, at all.
No,
Able to
I mean,
find anything.
I have not heard that, but I know that that was a lot more common than people would probably realize before the advent of kind of a more formalized FIFA structure on the global scale, and also obviously computers made all that kind of stuff easier.
Computers, television to see the person. Otherwise, someone's just pushing paper around somewhere else and looking at a name, right? So
Exactly.
they would recognize the name otherwise, and then it may raise flags. But if it's another name that gets slid across your table as you're checking and stamping things, you probably don't think twice about it. All right, so Puskás is there in Hungary. He's playing in 1945 in August. On August 20th, he makes his debut for Hungary at age 18. And then in 1948, at the age of 21, he is the top scorer in the league, but that was the year he was also the top scorer in all of Europe. So 21 years old is when he had that scoring title. And then another 3 times, as we said before, he was the top scorer in the Hungarian league. So already a dominant player in his late teens and early 20s. And again, if you remember these dates, right, we're just wrapping up World War II, and we haven't really gotten into the age of television and in terms of broadcast television, things were televised, but they might have been televised locally over the air. They might have been taped in some way and then shipped to people, but we didn't have the satellite capabilities just yet. And that would drastically change all sport as we get into the 1950s. So even though he's doing well and maybe have been the top scorer in Europe, that might have just made it around to some of the newspapers. But frankly, Hungary being behind the Iron Curtain at this time probably did not get a lot of notice until he started playing for the national team. So before we get into the magical Magyars, Dylan, do you have any comments?
I mean, it's not specifically relevant to Ferenc Puskás, but if people were wondering, Magyars is the Hungarian word for Hungarian. It is the demonym for Hungarian, but in the Hungarian language.
Right. Thank
Hence
you
the
for adding
alliteration. Yes.
and this is really considered their golden era for Hungary. And this spans from 1950 to 1956. And we're going to kind of pick it up. And because they're just amazing run they had, we'll start with the 1952 Olympics, which were held in Helsinki that year. Sweden was the defending champion from the last Olympics. This Hungarian team came into the 1952 Olympics undefeated over the last 2 years. And forgot to mention, as part of this, Puskás is the captain of this Hungarian team. So in these 1952 Olympics, we'll pick it up with the semifinals. The Hungarians are facing Sweden, as we said, the defending Olympic champions, and they just demolish them 6-0. They make it to the finals, and they beat Yugoslavia handily 2-0. Puskás has the opening goal in that final. And, this is also at a time where the Olympics were not an under 23 competition, which we know they are now. So you did have your full national teams playing. So this was a big, maybe wake up call to a lot of other people about this Hungarian team, kind of really coming through and sweeping everybody aside in these 1952 Olympics. In 1953, this is kind of a precursor to the European championships that we know today. They had what was called the Central European Championship, and they had, in this particular year, it was Austria, Czechoslovakia, Italy, Switzerland, and Hungary. Hungary, again, sweeps most of the teams aside, defeats Italy 3-0 in the final, where you have 2 goals from Puskás in that. So again, they're continuing to dominate. They have not lost a match yet since 1950. Later in 1953, in November, is what is regarded as the match of the century. And you may have heard that term if you know your soccer history a little bit. And this is England versus Hungary. They had agreed to play each other in a home and home series. So the first match was going to be played at Wembley. And England had never lost to a visiting team on home soil, barring the immediate British Isles countries, because they had been playing a long time. But as we're picking up after World War II, and teams like Brazil are coming over, and Spain and Italy are coming over, England had never lost on home soil. They're ranked 3rd in the world, but Hungary is ranked number 1. They pack in 105,000 people into Wembley. Whistle blows, Hungary scores in the opening minute. After 27 minutes, it's 4-1 Hungary. The game eventually ends 6-3 Hungary. You have 2 goals from Puskás, but that match sent shockwaves through English football. And it was because the Hungarians played with tactics and a style that most people hadn't seen before. And it really started to have an effect and an imprint on English football as people looked at this match, saw what happened, and started to look how they could adapt some of these quote unquote modern tactics into the English game. In the next year, in the spring, in May of 54, was the return match. This was 3 weeks before the 1954 World Cup, so kind of a tune-up for both of them. And England comes in, Hungary just demolishes them 7-1. And to this day, in 2026, that is England's men's national team worst ever international defeat, 7-1 in Hungary. And then that gets us to the 1954 World Cup, which is, to me, one of the more fascinating World Cups in a lot of ways and how it was stopped. We won't go into all the details, but that was held in Switzerland in 54. But we'll just highlight a couple of things, partly because Puskás got injured in this particular World Cup. And this is before we had substitutions also. So in the group stage, Hungary played West Germany, and this is West Germany's first World Cup since World War II. They've just been reinstated back into world football. They've been allowed to participate in this World Cup, and Hungary demolishes them 8-3. Puskás has 2 goals, but he gets injured during the game, and it wasn't identified till much, much later that he actually had a hairline fracture in his ankle. So it caused him to miss the quarterfinals and the semifinals. But Hungary advanced anyway, because this was a strong Hungarian team. This was not just Puskás. They make it all the way to the finals, and who do they face again? West Germany. This was also, as you get ready for this final in 1954, this is the first World Cup to be televised, because now that we're in the 50s, we're starting to get some satellite broadcasts. Eurovision is starting up in the 50s. So we're getting more and more sports that are being televised and sometimes broadcast actually live via satellite. So more and more people are being able to see some of these great athletes from around the world rather than just maybe reading about them in the newspapers. So first match to be televised. It is the second time Hungary has made it to a final. They made it to the final in 1938, but they lost to Italy. Puskás returns to the lineup, even though he's still injured because he has this hairline fracture. He's not going to finish, not going to heal after a couple of games. And Hungary jumps out to a 2-0 lead, scoring goals in the 6th and the 8th minutes. Germany, though, roars right back, scoring in the 10th and 18th minutes. And, just barely 20 minutes into the game, we have a 2-2 tie. It stays that way till the 84th minute. Germany scores a goal. Very close to full time. Puskás levels it, but is called offside. The game ends 3-2. West Germany wins, handing the Hungarians their very first loss since 1950 in all their matches that they had. But Puskás still wins the Golden Ball. He's named to the best 11. And Hungary, just as a team, scored the most goals by any country at 27, which I believe is still a record, even though it was a much smaller tournament and fewer games. And they averaged 5.4 goals per game, which is absolutely crazy for any national team to be able to be that dominant over other national teams.
And it is true that in this era of football, games were generally higher scoring, but even with that in mind, Hungary was an exception above that.
Yes.
And I wanted to say too. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, it's interesting because when I was in high school, I took German as my language, and we actually twice throughout my 4 years of German watched a film called Das Wunder von Bern, the wonder of Bern, or the miracle of Bern.
Yep.
And so it's just very interesting because this game, the 1954 final, is held up as a very important moment in German, not just sporting history, but like cultural history. It was something that people in West Germany could rally around for the first time, really, since the end of World War II. And so it's really interesting to have had that perspective on it and now kind of come at it from this side. Really different perceptions.
Yeah, and I mean, as you said, great victory for Germany and is referred to in English as the miracle of Bern. But it is, and the Germans were able to hand the Hungarians their first ever loss. Since 1950, since they've been on this amazing undefeated run. Hungarians, though, still for a couple more years would be dominant. In 1955, so a year after the end of the World Cup, and we're just highlighting some matches, some key matches here. They had a lot more matches than the ones we're talking about. They played Scotland in Hampden Park. 113,000 people were at that match. And Scotland, after knowing what happened to England a couple years earlier, were determined not to be humiliated on their own country. And they played a very defensive and then counterattacking game. By most of the news reports I read, it seems that poor finishing kept Scotland from keeping the score a little bit closer. But that 4-2 score was the closest any national team had gotten to, we'll call it beating Hungary, in a friendly since 1950. So 4-2 is the closest anybody got to Hungary in a friendly game. Puskás had high praise for Scotland in that game, especially their winger, John McKenzie, for his stellar play out on the wings, and just Scotland in general for their tactics and their approach to the game and how they played it. In 56, almost a year later in September, Hungary faced the Soviet Union in a friendly, and again, right, this Hungary sits behind the Iron Curtain. And at this time, like you are Soviet before you're Hungarian. At least that's the way the Soviets thought of things. And they really, in almost all cases, tried to quash any kind of nationalism. Sport was one of the few places where it was allowed, but even then, the Soviets were very quick to stamp things out. So Hungary goes to face the Soviet Union. They're playing at Lenin Central Stadium, 102,000 people for the match. Soviets, like the English, unbeaten at home, and the Hungarians beat them 1-0, right, in the Soviet Union. And this is 1956. This is going to be the same year as the Hungarian Revolution. And that 1-0 victory of Hungary over the Soviet Union, after already having some unrest in Hungary in 1956, helps feed this nationalist pride and, likely, among a whole bunch of other things that we won't get into, leads to this revolution. We're going to talk about the revolution and its consequences for Puskás in a second, but let's finish up kind of this run that the Hungarians had during this time before leading up to the revolution. Hungarians played a total of 19 games after the 54 World Cup. So, and again, undefeated in all those. So all in all, from 1950 to 1956 during this run, they played 69 games. They won 58. They drew 10. And their only defeat was that 1954 World Cup final to West Germany. They scored 436 goals over that time span, which averages out to better than 6 goals per game. And they're really regarded for bringing a lot of innovations to the game. And we could do a whole podcast on, some of their effects just as a team. They were kind of the early version of total football that was then improved upon a little more by the Dutch teams of the early 70s. And we will go into some more accolades specifically for Puskás later, but he was captain of these teams. And the BBC at the end of the 20th century listed this particular Hungarian side as the greatest international side of the 20th century. So you're thinking like Pelé's Brazil teams were also, in the 20th century. So ranked as the greatest international side. As people have done ELO rankings and then have gone back to apply them to past events, that 1954 team, even though they lost that World Cup final, is regarded as the greatest ever team in the history of international football. And for comparison, because they've ranked all the different years, and probably something we can hang our hats on because of our age, the 2010 Cup winners, Spain, as you mentioned before, with Iniesta and everyone, which I think everybody thought was one of the greatest teams ever, they rank 5th all time. So this Hungarian team, and just to give you something, again, to hang your hat on in relative terms of how dominant and great this Hungarian team was through the 50s.
Well, and remember as well, too, that Spain team didn't just win that 2010 World Cup. They won the 08 and the 12 European Cups as well. So for this team to be 4 spots higher is really saying a lot about how dominant they were.
Yes. Yeah, it really is. And it's impressive. Again, before doing this, and because I like soccer history and I've looked into some things before, but I did not realize how dominant they were till we really started prepping and putting things together for this particular episode. And Puskás himself, like just how many goals he scored and for how long he was a dominant player in both European and world football. All right, so let's go ahead and jump into the Hungarian Revolution because this is pivotal to the change in trajectory of Puskás's career. So Puskás's Budapest team had quite a few players that were on the national team. And that was one of the changes that the Hungarians made compared to most national teams. When we talked about fundamental changes, is the coach picked a bunch of teams from one good team and supplemented it with a few better players, and that was the team that they trotted out for the national teams. And many countries, what they did for their national teams, the national team coach didn't pick the players. There was a committee who picked who they thought were the best players, and they basically picked an all-star team to try to go together and play rather than the best group of players to play. And that was a big change that other countries started to emulate after this golden age of the Hungarian team. So you got most of these players from the national team are also playing on this club team, but their club team in Budapest is in the 1956-57 European Cup. They have a first round matchup against Athletic Bilbao, and they travel out to Spain. They lose the first leg 3-2. And before they can make it back to Hungary, the Hungarian Revolution erupts. Right? Players decide, well, we can't go back, like it's a mess in Hungary, so they stay in Europe and they try to arrange a return leg, which they do. They're able to get it set up at Heysel Stadium in Brussels, and they are able to have the match. It ends up being a 3-3 draw. So Bilbao moves on, and the Budapest team is eliminated. But now the players being eliminated are kind of in limbo because in the time of scheduling the replay match and getting it all together and all the players staying in Europe, this revolution has been quashed by the Soviets. It didn't even last 20 days. So, and brutally quashed. So most of the players are like, I'm not going back. So the players end up organizing a fundraising tour because they're stranded out there, and they create a tour that's much against the wishes of the Hungarian FA. They're not happy about this. FIFA is not happy about this. But they still organize a fundraising tour, and they go to Italy, Portugal, Spain, and then travel out to Brazil, and then eventually return to Europe. And then they just kind of break up and part ways and trying to figure out what to do. Puskás is now 29 years old. He plays in some unofficial games for Espanyol. AC Milan and Juventus are attempting to sign him. There's talks. And then UEFA slaps a 2-year ban on Puskás, not just Puskás, but we're focused on Puskás here, but slaps a 2-year ban on Puskás for refusing to return to Budapest. That 2-year ban prevents him from playing in Europe. So from 29 to 31, he's got no soccer. He lives for Austria. He lives in Austria for a little bit, then lives in Italy. But as soon as the 58 ban is up, that 2-year ban, Puskás tries to play in Italy. Both the big Italian teams, Milan and Juventus, are considering him, but he's 31. He hasn't played in 2 years, so now he's overweight. And they don't think it's worth the risk, right? 2 years out of not playing, 31 years old, overweight, it's just not going to happen. Manchester United considers signing him, because they have just experienced the deaths of a lot of their squad from the Munich air disaster. But there's problems in England with their FA rules regarding foreigners, because generally foreigners at this time did not play for European clubs. You had to have a 2-year residency rule in England before you could play for a club. And that same rule would basically stay in place till roughly 1978, when they were forced to change after they had joined the European Union, which was in 1971. So it took a while for someone to challenge it in a court case and open that up so that foreigners, especially people who are part of the European Union, could come and play English soccer.
That's
But
why
Puskás,
Brexit happened.
yeah, and I'm not going to get into that one. Puskás also is not terribly fond of this idea of going to England and then having to learn a new language. He's picked up Spanish by playing in Spain. He's lived in Italy for a while. It's just that wasn't really, doesn't appear to be that it was high on his list to go to England anyway. Eventually, Real Madrid comes along and and decides to take a chance on him at 31. And really, those become his glory years in Europe. And because of broadcast television, this really lets a lot of people, mostly around Europe, but even around the world, be able to see Puskás play. And this is where I think he gets a lot more of his notoriety, even though we've had a World Cup and we've heard a lot about him. It's these years in Spain, especially when people thought he's overweight, he's not going to be any good. He's 31. There's no way. They really become some of his glory years. So before we jump into his career at Real Madrid, do you have any comments?
No, I mean, I didn't know the language barrier had played a factor into his choice to go to Real Madrid, or I guess the club's choices to give him that opportunity. But makes a lot of sense now that you've laid it out.
Yeah, so let's look at his time in Real Madrid. And again, we talked about due in large part to live satellite broadcasts, the growth of Eurovision across Europe, televising sports. Uh, it really helped show him on more of a continental stage at the very least. In his first season with Real Madrid, he had 4 hat tricks. He had other games also where he scored more than 3 goals. And during his 8 seasons with Real Madrid, he ended up scoring 156 goals in 180 La Liga matches. Each of his first 6 seasons, he scored 20 plus goals. So again, all in his 30s. He won the scoring title 4 different times. He won 5 straight La Liga titles with Real Madrid from 1961 to 1965. And then in European competition with Real, he scored 35 goals in 39 games. He won the European Cup in 59, 60, and 66. And in the 63-64 season of the European Cup, he was the top goal scorer in the tournament at age 37. Right? So huge numbers and goals and games until it got to the very, very end where age, injuries, other things were all starting to catch up on him. And in that very, very last season with Real Madrid, there was a quick drop off. The first 6 years were great, and then not so great the 7th year, not as great, I guess, and then really not so great in the 8th year, and that was time to hang up the boots. During his time though, when he was in Real Madrid, because he's without a country, he can't go back to Hungary, chooses not to go back to Hungary, I guess, based on what is happening and what has happened in Hungary. So he gets Spanish citizenship during the time, and he ends up playing 3 games for Spain at the 1962 World Cup. He ends up playing 4 times overall, but the bulk of that are the 3 group games at the World Cup in Chile in 1962. Spain didn't do so hot in that World Cup. They were out in the group stage, actually finished last in the group. They did win 1 match against Mexico, but lost to Czechoslovakia and lost to Brazil. And this was Brazil was the defending champion because they won 58 and they were coming back in 62 for their back-to-back world titles, becoming only the second country to win back-to-back World Cup titles. Italy was the first in 34 and 38. And then just as a side note, which I didn't know last week, because I was doing some cleanup on some of the research and saw that Puskás also appeared once for the Madrid football team, which is not a UEFA kind of team. It's one of those in the other kind of leagues and kind of its own team that does some tournaments. So he played once for the Madrid football team.
I think it was in a previous iteration of this podcast, but we did an episode about Canifa, right? I mean, that's probably in the realm that they would have been involved in.
It was in the realm of something like that.
Yeah.
And then that kind of finishes up his career in Spain. And as soon as he wraps up his career in Spain, he has a little taste of coaching immediately, right as he's getting ready to step down from playing at Real Madrid there in Spain. But really his first big coaching job, where he's brought over and on a 3-year contract, is technically in the United States. And we're going to get into that in just a second. So I know we talked about it. So he's with the Vancouver Royals, but he gets signed to his first big coaching job to a team in San Francisco in the United States. So before we jump into that, because that's going to get us right up to him coming to San Diego, Dylan, any other comments or questions before we jump into Puskás coming to North America?
Just one question. When he made his change to represent Spain, in your research, did you come across any of the hurdles that FIFA might have put up to change that nationality? Because I know in modern day that's not an easy thing to do, but I don't know how that's changed.
I did not, and I thought about it was on my radar, but just wasn't in the
fair enough
time constraints.
I might imagine at that point in time, just because global movement wasn't what it was today, having citizenship for a country might be enough for FIFA to just say like whatever, so
yeah. And I wonder, I don't remember when the full UEFA started. I'd have to go back and double check, and it should have been fully in place now as a confederation. But I wonder a little bit with the political play of Hungary being behind the Iron Curtain and everything else, if things were a little looser than they might have been if someone wanted to go, say, from Germany to Spain or Spain to Germany, or Germany to England.
Makes sense.
Just because of the situation, might have kind of given him a home, because he was without a home, basically. Although that was why he's suspended, right? Because they recalled him home and he refused to go. So that and FIFA was not happy about that. But that would be an interesting thing to look into, what the parameters were and what led to him being able to actually switch over. Maybe we could look that up between our 2 episodes and just do a little follow-up next week and see what led to that. I'll make a note to myself and see if we can follow up. All right, so let's look at Puskás coming to North America. So now, I don't want to get too much into this, but we do need to explain a couple of things of what's going on in the US/Canada at around this time. Because we're going to go into it in detail when we do our series on the 1968 San Diego Toros. But the 1967 NPSL season had just wrapped up. So we had the NPSL and we had the USA in 1967. And then I'll go through that in a second. So we have the NPSL. So the NASL hasn't officially started yet. And in the NPSL, there was a team called the San Francisco Golden Gate Gales. And I believe they played at Kezar Stadium. After the first year, the owner hires Puskás, signed him to a 3-year contract, right? And brings him to San Diego to lead that team. So he's over in San Francisco. He's ready to start with that team. and start prepping for the 1968 season in the NPSL. However, in December of 67, the NPSL and the USA decide to merge to form the NASL. And part of what they did in all this merger was, and again, this goes to me, the exact problem we've always had with our professional sports franchises is they didn't want teams in the same market competing against each other. Not understanding the value of a derby and what that can bring. But they want them competing against each other. So the Bay Area in 67 had two teams. They had this Golden Gate Gales team in San Francisco, and they had the Oakland Clippers. Well, the owner of the Golden Gate Gales, and I need to follow up on this, but I think he had Vancouver ties. He was willing to fold the Golden Gate Gales, leave that market to the Oakland Clippers, and then he bought the controlling interest in the Vancouver franchise that was up there from the one of the previous leagues. I can't remember which league now the Vancouver team was in, but went up there. So after the merger, gets the controlling interest of the Vancouver franchise and basically merges the Golden Gate team and the Vancouver team together there in Vancouver. But we have a slight problem. Both teams have already hired a head coach. Obviously, Puskás was hired by the owner of the San Francisco team. Bobby Robson was the coach for Vancouver, and he had already done preparations to start getting ready. So as they do this merger, since the owner of the old San Francisco team was the one who had the controlling interest, and he's the one who hired Puskás, he said, Puskás is going to be the head coach, and Bobby Robson, if you want to stay, you can be the assistant coach. Bobby Robson, of course, says, no, not staying and being the assistant coach. I was hired to be the head coach. He leaves, takes a role back at Fulham, his old club, as the coach, takes the reins there. And he would eventually sue for breach of contract. I saw that in a couple locations, but I never found out what the result was of the lawsuit, if it got dropped or settled or what happened. I didn't have time to find that. But Bobby Robson, for those, again, who might know their history, he became the longtime coach of England from 1982 to 1990. So, interesting, again, when you look back, how different people's paths cross and what happened and what might have happened differently if Bobby Robson would have stayed at Vancouver and Puskás had left instead of Puskás staying. So Puskás stays, and in this merger, because the owner from San Francisco is coming over and becoming the lead, all these changes are not sitting well with the fans. So it's a little bit of a rocky start. But Puskás was very, very high from what he had seen on the US and what was happening in the US with soccer. And he actually claimed, and this is quote, "We have the players to take on the world in 5 years. The Royals will be quite ready to take on Real Madrid and beat them in 5 years." That's some big talk for coming over. And the interesting part about that is in the 1968 season, by all accounts that I've been able to dig up, there were some really, really strong teams and strong players. We had lots of teams come over on the tours to the US like they've always done. They were doing it back here in the late 60s as well. And a lot of these great teams were, losing handily to some of these 1968 NASL teams. That they were quite strong for that 1 year. And again, we'll get into all the ups and downs of that when we get into the 1968 San Diego Toros season. So maybe in his mind, seeing some of the players that were there, he could say, yeah, all we need to do is tighten up a few things and get some new players in, and we really could compete. I don't know. I think when you look back on that comment, it really strikes as arrogance and someone who doesn't understand what's going on. But I think if you're him coming from the outside and just seeing the players that were around, I could see why he might think that. And, I think for the rest of us, knowing how the ownership side of things work and the commercial side and the marketing side, you think Yeah, how could that? How could anyone ever think that would happen with the way we run professional sports in this country? So that whole merger ended up being a bit of a mess, and it left Puskás and the team scouting for players right up until the start of the season. And they really, even though they started off strongly for the season, they were kind of, a little bit behind everybody else moving forward, and it ended up showing for that 1968 season. So now we're finally ready to talk about when Puskás brought the Vancouver Royals down to San Diego. And before we talk about the actual match, Dylan, do you have any comments?
Not particularly. I'm surprised to hear that the NASL teams were that successful. I never have guessed.
Yeah, it seems that not every team, but a lot of the teams in 1968, after the merger, especially of the two leagues, um, where there were some really good teams and good players on those teams. And, we'll talk about why in our other series, and then it comes all crashing down. And it took a long time to build it back up again until maybe, say, 1977 with the NASL when they kind of got closer back to their, I'll say, glory days of 1968 from that first season. Okay, so let's look at when Puskás came to San Diego. The date of the match is May 8th, 1968. The San Diego Toros are hosting the Vancouver Royals. San Diego is coming into the match, top of the Western division there with a 6-1-1 record. San Diego has, again, some great players. They're a high scoring team. They have Vava as one of their players, Brazilian great midfielder who played on the last two Brazil World Cup teams in 66 and 62. And and Vancouver is coming in with a record of 4-1-2. So they both have winning records. They're both, coming in looking strong-ish to the start of the season. San Diego a little bit better. Vancouver, though, as they're coming into this match, they're missing their starting goalkeeper and one of their starting defenders due to some injuries. So they're a little bit depleted and have to rotate some positions coming into this match. They're going to play at Balboa Stadium, which is where the San Diego Toros played, I believe, all their games. The attendance is interesting. This is one of those things, and digging back into old newspaper articles, especially when you get an AP or UPI report, because if someone reports out something wrong, then it gets picked up by a whole bunch of different people. The range of attendance I've seen is 2,614 to 6,614. So clearly, that first number, someone wasn't able to read or transcribe or something. My best guess, based on what I've been able to find, is that the attendance was closer to the 2,614 number, not the 6,614 number, which was not great attendance. I mean, generally not great, but I think Vancouver led the league in attendance that year, and they were averaging a little over 6,000. And 6,000 was not a terrible draw in 1968 for a sporting event, especially for a relatively brand new sport. But 2,600 is not 6,600. And I did read several reports how the Toros were having difficulty at the gate, even though they were top of the table and looked to be possibly the dominant team of the season. So they're having trouble, but I did also see some reports that the attendance wasn't great. That's what leads me to believe it was actually the 2,614, but they still talked about this being a Wednesday night, and it outdrew the Padres by almost 1,000 people.
Wow.
Yeah. So the Padres were not playing so well at that time. And just as a side, and we'll get into this in our series, but the Toros, I think all the teams coming in, they really thought the as they would describe them, the ethnic communities and the ethnic enclaves were really going to carry the league in terms of attendance, which was we'll talk about all the huge misses that the league made along those times, but in many places around the league, they just did not connect with their communities, ethnic or otherwise. They did not connect well. But even, we have the lowish attendance numbers. We still have the match against two of the top teams in the West. And we have kickoff. And in the second minute, the Vancouver Royals score to take the lead, right off the bat. San Diego, again, by what I've read, doesn't seem to be terribly concerned overall. Their game is usually to concede possession mostly, defend well, and counterattack. And they certainly, by all descriptions, have the speed, especially out on the wings, to really hurt people on the counter. And they really try to do things to draw the defenders up and in with some of their runs and forwards to create space behind. And it works for San Diego because they come back with 3 goals in 3 minutes. Vava opens the scoring for San Diego in the 7th minute with a great give and go with Pepe Fernandez. Pepe Fernandez then scores in the 18th minute to give San Diego the lead. And then in the 22nd minute, Baiza scores from 15 yards out. Again, 3 goals in 15 minutes to bring the game to 3-1. Late in the half, there's a goalmouth scramble, and San Diego's goalkeeper is caught way out of position as one of the Royals players is able to pick up the ball, but he, again, by most accounts, misses a sitter and hits the post. So the Toros are able to go in 3-1 at halftime. Second half seems to play pretty much like the first in terms of possession and style. Vancouver has most of the possession. San Diego's willing to concede it. And, not much happens till the 82nd minute when Pepe Fernandez scores again. And then in added time, Pepe Fernandez scores his 3rd, completes his hat trick, and he finishes the game with 3 goals and 2 assists. And, a lot of comment both from Puskás and others about the Brazilian great Vava really being the maestro of the match for San Diego, pulling the strings in midfield. Even though he's not as fast as he used to be, he's just great at spreading the ball around and springing people free, especially behind the defense. And that's pretty much how the match ended. And, Puskás had a history this season of some volatile displays on the sideline that didn't seem to make an appearance in this match here in San Diego. But they certainly were not happy to lose this match after opening the season with 3 straight wins. They hit a run here where they're definitely on the losing end, heading back up into Vancouver for, I think, a match with maybe Chicago or something. Was, again, one of the strong teams coming up. Vancouver Royals and Puskás would make one more trip to San Diego during that 1968 season, since every team in the West played home and away twice. But we'll talk about that match when we do our series on the San Diego Toros. And that's when Puskás came to San Diego. We'll have a couple more comments about this when we kind of do our wrap up. But Dylan, do you have anything you want to add before we kind of wrap things up specifically with Puskás here?
Not really anything specific, I guess. I've said this before probably. I lament that Balboa Stadium is not really anything that the city uses anymore. I think it's a high school stadium at this point. Whatever, that's too bad. But yeah, I mean, I like prior to doing this, I didn't even really know. I don't think I knew Puskás had coached in the NASL, to be honest, before we started researching this. So yeah, it's kind of an interesting way to tie it all back home, and I'm looking forward to learning about the other match.
Yeah, and I as well did not know Puskás had ever coached in San Diego. I think it was sometime last year in 2025 that was brought to my attention as we were looking to transition to do this podcast. And then, that got me digging into some other things around San Diego and Puskás and soccer. But that was news to me. In fact, I think many places when you look and you see Puskás's coaching career, occasionally they might mention he coached in Canada, but almost never do they mention specifically the Vancouver Royals and the NASL. And it wasn't until this last week that I realized he was actually signed for the San Francisco team first, and then the merger happened, and that's what brought him up to Vancouver. Otherwise, he would have been coaching, up the road for us here in San Francisco if all things had played out, without a merger actually happening to form the NASL. So a little interesting when you dig deeper into newspaper articles and find out little bits of information that tend to get lost in the big grand summaries of someone's career or their coaching or their playing. But fun when you're looking at how do things connect more locally to us, San Diego / California. I again was within the last week that I found out that he was originally signed to the San Francisco team. All right, so let's wrap up things with Puskás, since he's kind of been the big focus of our episode here. As we just talked about his coaching career, and kind of to summarize, he would, besides Canada, which was where the team was based here for the NASL, he did coach in Spain, he coached in Greece, he coached in Chile, he coached in Saudi Arabia, he coached in Egypt, Paraguay, Australia, and eventually the Hungarian national team at the very, very end of his coaching career. But all that over the 25 years after he stopped playing. And probably two of the big highlights. 1971, he was the coach of Panathinaikos. He led them to the European Cup final. What I learned that I did not know, I mean, I had known about this, and he led them in 1971. I know the team, Panathinaikos, and I had no idea till sometime within the last few weeks that at the time, Panathinaikos was an amateur team. They were not, the Greek football didn't fully professionalize until 1979. So he took and led an amateur team all the way to the European Cup final. And they ended up losing 0-2 to Ajax. But I had no idea that they were an amateur side.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah.
I know, as a casual observer of Greek football, Panathinaikos is one of the 3 or 4 clubs you regularly hear about. But I did confirm this before the show. That 71 final appearance is still the only time a Greek club has made a European Cup final.
Not just a Greek club. I think it's the only time an amateur team has made it to the final as well.
That's probably also true. I had a harder time confirming.
It's definitely the first amateur team to make it.
Well, and I would guess if there were another amateur team, it would have come prior to 71. I'm assuming, just because the game was professionalizing, right?
Well, it was the first amateur team in 71.
Okay, so right, yeah,
another one.
Yeah,
afterwards.
True. Right. Well, there you go.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're looking at the rundown here that we have about Puskás and kind of following along, because I was going to hand this over to you for 1989 stuff in Australia. I know you mentioned it a little bit on the last episode, but
sure, yeah, I think it's actually pretty interesting. His time in Greece probably had, there's some connections there. South Melbourne, Hellas is right. The Greek word for Greece. Was a club built around the Greek diaspora in Melbourne. That there was, Greece had a lot of economic turmoil in the second half of the 20th century, and a lot of Greek people went to Australia, including the father of one, Ange Postecoglou. And so he grew up rooting for that team, South Melbourne Hellas, went on to play for them, went on to become one of their best all-time players and their coach. But in Puskás's few year stint at South Melbourne, he had a really big influence on Postecoglou. I believe Postecoglou was the captain during the time. They won National Soccer League title. They won cups. And Postecoglou still to this day will point to his time under Puskás as perhaps the most formative of his kind of footballing identity. And, I obviously being a Spurs fan, there's kind of that slant to it, but I personally have a very big affinity for Ange Postecoglou because of the type of person he is and the type of football he asks his teams to play. And both of those things he attributes very directly to Ferenc Puskás. So, I think I said this at the end of uh, last episode. In the same way that Marcelo Bielsa is kind of your favorite manager's favorite manager, the Peps, the Pochettinos, the Mourinhos will all point to
Right.
Bielsa. My favorite manager, his favorite manager is Ferenc Puskás.
Uh, well said on that one. Um, for Puskás, kind of towards the end of his life in the early 90s, after the fall of communism, which happened in 1989, Puskás would finally return back to Hungary and make it his home. He'd do his one final coaching stint with the Hungarian national team there in the early 90s, um, but he was, you know, age wise and everything else, he was already getting up there. In the year 2000, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. In September of 2006, he was admitted to the hospital. And then on November 17th, 2006, Puskás died from pneumonia at age 79. At the time, he was survived by his wife and his daughter. There was a big state funeral, as you would imagine, for Puskás, and in December of 2006, he was buried under the dome of St. Stephen's Basilica.
Is that
Now,
in Budapest? I'm guessing.
yes,
Okay.
in Budapest. Um, so for his legacy, we've talked about a lot about his accomplishments, but in terms of bigger things for legacy, in 1999 he was named the European Footballer of the Century by L'Equipe, the French magazine, French newspaper.
Which is, I mean, significant in and of itself, but this is a little inside baseball or inside football, if you will. But L'Equipe is notoriously stringent with their praise of players. I think they've given out a 10 out of 10 match rating like less than 50 times ever. So if they are naming him player of the century, like that is, you got the hard ones to get.
Yeah. And I would say this is probably when Puskás came onto my radar as we're getting to the end of the 20th century. Because certainly when I was younger and I was in high school, even college, and I liked soccer, I followed soccer, but it wasn't until well into adulthood that I started getting more interested in the history of soccer. And in 1999, as you're closing in on the millennium and you're starting to have all these retrospectives like we do at the end of a year or the end of a decade, but this is the big thing. What was the greatest thing of the 20th century? And then that's when I started hearing Puskás's name tossed about that I had never heard before. I've heard Pele and I've heard Maradona. I've heard all these different names as I was growing up because I was at a time where I was able to see them play and experience that. But anything before my real paying attention would probably say in the early 70s, I didn't know about other than maybe, looking back on Pele or looking back on a couple of players on their earlier careers. So at the end of the millennium, like in 1999, like we said, L'Equipe names him the European Footballer of the Century. In the year 2000, there's an organization called the IFFHS, and I didn't write it out here. It's the International Federation for Football History and Statistics, I think is what it stands for. But they named their 20th century men's dream team, and Puskás was on that. 2001, he had an asteroid named after him. Um, in 2002, they renamed the main stadium in Budapest, the NEP Stadium, which I believe is the People's Stadium, translation. But they renamed it to the Puskás Ferenc Stadium, which ended up being demolished then in 2017 to make way for a new modern arena that was completed in 2019 that is now referred to as the Puskás Arena. In 2004, he was named the greatest Hungarian player of the last 50 years, which was part of UEFA's 50th anniversary celebration, where they asked all the FAs to come up with their best players. In 2009, as we mentioned, in the opening, FIFA created the Puskás Award to be given to the player who scored the most beautiful goal over the past calendar year. And in 2017, in reference back to his time in Australia, they erect a statue of him in Melbourne. So there are others too. That's just some highlights, but he's on a lot of lists of best of things. And having that goal, I think, is nice because it keeps his name in people's minds, or someone might be interested. We have this Puskás Award. Who is Puskás? But I really think, to kind of wrap things up and bring it back around to what we teased this as, the night he came, to coach the Vancouver Royals when they played the San Diego Toros. Unlike when Pele came, and we did that episode when Pele came to San Diego and the New York Cosmos were there, and Balboa Stadium was full, like 20,000 people coming to watch the match. Like 2,000 people showed up. I think in this time with the NASL in '68 and the two leagues that preceded it, like they really, for a group, and again, we'll get into this in the 1968 Toros series that we're doing, but for a group of business people who claimed that all you need is marketing to get people to be in the stadium, that's and to teach people the game and everything else. Man, I've never seen a group of people drop the ball so much on marketing to your community, really, when it comes to it, in letting people aware of some of the great people that were involved. It's not been until very recently when I really started looking at the San Diego Toros roster and seeing some of the names and digging into what these players had done and where they had played before. Be like, man, this was a good team of good players. And when you go back through newspaper clippings and things, especially in San Diego area, it's hard to find anything. And I think that's part of it. Your sports desk, what they choose to cover and not cover, can have a great impact on whether that community is going to be involved in the team or not. But to find out, I found way more information about this match between the Vancouver Royals and the San Diego Toros, played in San Diego, from the multiple reporters that covered it from Vancouver. Right. And some coming down to San Diego for the match. But Vancouver was article after article after article, and in all of San Diego, a little blurb here or there. So, these teams, these clubs and stuff really missed an opportunity. And while I would have been 1 year old at the time when this match happened, there's a part of me that wishes, sometimes when I dig into these, if there was just a way to time travel and go back, I would have loved to just gone and watch it just to see the personality on the sideline and how he coached. And I think that would have been great. And, trying to find photos and, God forbid, video or film, I guess, from that time, but try to find anything from what happened around this time period in matches is really difficult. Because it's just, especially in San Diego in '68, the Toros were not well covered. The Jaws was much better in '76, but still not great. But the Toros, really, really difficult to find information.
Bummer.
Yeah, it really is. And really, again, we'll dive into a lot of these reasons and why things happen when we do that series on the 1968 San Diego Toros. But for this, I hope it was an interesting journey for people who may not know a lot about Ferenc Puskás. I know we try to focus on San Diego mostly, which we tried to get our San Diego connection out of this, but I thought it was also a good chance to really dive in and take a look at the career of one of the first international superstars in world soccer. So I guess, well, actually, Dylan, we'll give you any final thoughts before we wrap up this segment here.
Sure. Yeah, I guess it's not so much Pushkas specific necessarily, but I've probably recommended this book on this show or others before, and probably will again. But I learned most of what I knew about Pushkas, years ago from reading Jonathan Wilson's book Inverting the Pyramid. There's a very long chapter about the mighty Magyars and Puskás's role, or the magical, or whichever, I don't recall what the adjective was, but it's a very excellent book if you're curious about the history of the development of soccer tactics, really from the inception of the game to, well, the book was written in like 2010-ish, I think, so around then. But yeah, the chapter on the Hungarian team is really enlightening. And so the book itself is excellent, but even if it's very dense, it's not an easy read. So if you're really just curious about the Hungarian team, I'm sure you could find, a blurb of that chapter or whatever. It was really interesting.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that's a fascinating book, and yeah, Jonathan Wilson can be dense, but
Yes.
but good and interesting if you like that historical kind of perspective.
No relation.
Would recommend almost anything by Jonathan Wilson.
Yes. No relation.
Yeah. Okay, so I don't want to forget again because I forgot to do the question at the beginning of the segment. So now we're at the end. Let's go ahead and bring up our trivia question one more time. And we want to know the player that broke Ferenc Puskás' international assist records. Remember, it was at 53, and in 2013, we did have a player break that record. Dylan, I know you know the answer, but you said you
I think if you asked me
was
to,
this person on your radar?
yeah, I think if you asked me to really honestly guess before I saw the answer, I think I'd have landed on Wesley Schneider. I think he had a really underrated career, excellent passer, great assister, and a talisman for the Dutch team for a long time. So I think he would have been my guess, but it's not right.
Yeah, and I think I do remember when this happened. But if you would have asked me probably a couple years ago, I don't think I would have remembered, because I don't think we also made a very big deal about it in this country. And because we are the San Diego Soccer History Podcast, that should have been a little bit of a clue to help you out with the answer. It is an American. And really, there's only one American I think it could possibly be once you get to being an American. The record was tied and broken in a U.S. men's national team match, quarterfinal match, I believe it was, against El Salvador for the Gold Cup. And the answer is, of course, Landon Donovan. Landon Donovan held that record, the international record for assists, for 10 years before it was broken. So it was just broken in the last couple of years, right? We had it tied, and it was tied for a while, and then we finally had it broken. So we said in the beginning, Puskás is fourth all time at 53. Landon Donovan, 58 is where he ended. And there are two that sit above Landon Donovan. Any guesses on who they are? They were kind of hidden in some of the stuff we had for our documents. I don't know if you saw it, but
I mean, I didn't. I know Messi has to be one of them, though. The guy
Messi
is
is number one.
Yeah. Okay. There you
go. But
yeah.
just, I think he's just at 60 or 61, just barely. He just broke the record, I think, in 2025.
Oh wow! I didn't realize it was that recent.
It wasn't. I mean, Landon, I think. Yeah, no, I can't remember, but it's relatively recent, within the last few years. In the 20s is when this was broken. So, but one other person was tied with Donovan for a while before Messi kind of caught up and passed the both of them. But the other person has moved ahead of Donovan. We'll give a hint: more recent and Brazilian. I mean, not old. Obviously someone's not going to pass Landon Donovan who hasn't been playing. But any guesses with if we say Brazilian?
I mean, yeah, maybe like Juninho or something like that. Even though I know that's not the right answer, but that's my inside football guess.
It's Neymar.
Really? I wouldn't. He didn't. I guess especially with some of the people he'd have played with in his earlier years at Brazil, that kind of makes sense. But you don't think of him as much of a prolific assister.
Yeah, I don't think you think of him as a prolific assister, just like you don't think of Puskás, I think, when people think
True.
back as a prolific assister. Um, but I think when you have high quality people, well, I think two things. When you have a high quality attack and you have other people who are good goal scorers and a lot of attention is focused on you, sometimes it's easy then to lay off that pass to someone else who's open because everybody's focused on you. So I think it's not terribly surprising. But I remember in 2013 when they put that up there, that Landon put a stat on the match or somewhere right around that time that he had broken the record, and seeing Puskás's name up there and thinking this is a big deal. And I really don't remember, other than them making a brief comment about it, it's like everybody just kind of moved on. It wasn't a big deal. But yeah, Landon Donovan for about a decade was the all-time international career assist leader.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's also,
yeah,
and I mean, I understand injuries probably played a bigger role for Neymar than his move to PSG, but it does make you wonder what Neymar's career numbers could have looked like if he hadn't made some of the poor decisions he made career wise. If I mean, he was,
yeah.
that was when he was at Barcelona, he'd have, right, or is it more recent that he broke Donovan? You said it was for so 23, so he'd
What
have been,
what
yeah.
he yeah, somewhere around there,
So
23. I think he
then I guess it
tied
really was the
Donovan.
injuries more that that hampered him, but still, you can't help but wonder.
Yeah, it's I was definitely surprised when I saw Neymar's name when I looked at, who had surpassed. And when I saw Landon's name, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that, but I had totally forgotten it. It's like that also got kind of a little bit lost in our history, that was a thing. That you've got Messi, Neymar, Donovan, and Puskás in the top four. What great company to be in for Landon Donovan, with those other three.
Very much so. And just
Okay.
for the record, my Wesley Snyder guess wasn't terrible, but it wasn't great either. His 32 career international assists does not put him in the top 10.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I forget who all the other ones are. I'll have to go follow that up some other
I,
time.
I
But
can I can throw it to you. I got it right here in front of me.
who's
Shandor Kocsis is another Hungarian at 51. So Messi 61, Neymar 59, Donovan 58, Puskás 53, Shandor Kocsis, another Hungarian at 51, Pele at 47, Thomas Muller at 41, Luis
mhm.
Suarez at 39, Cristiano Ronaldo at 37, and Kevin De Bruyne at 36. So that actually is some more modern
Okay.
names you would expect to hear on there, especially Thomas Muller. I'm not surprised to see on there.
But still a considerable ways back.
Absolutely,
Some of those
absolutely.
numbers,
And
yeah.
he has retired from the national team, even though he's still playing. So that 41 is locked in.
Yeah. Wow. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll follow up on some of these a little bit later. And that pretty much wraps up our show for the most part for tonight. So um, just like to remind everybody that this week in San Diego soccer history, this podcast is brought to you by the San Diego Soccer History Society. And if you like what we are doing, please help spread the word so other people can find out about us and listen to the podcast. If you're listening or watching to us here on YouTube, you could always like and subscribe. That always helps, as we all know with these kinds of videos. Um, if it could also help being engaging or to engage in our community section here on YouTube. We always post the trivia question that we leave you with at the end of each episode there and give people a chance to respond to the answers. So you can do that. You can follow us on Blue Sky at sdsoccerhistory.org. And just note, I know not everybody does Blue Sky, which I totally understand. And we don't do Musk and Meta and some of those other billionaire ones. So we're working on trying to find a bridge for some of those options between what we're doing on Blue Sky, so people don't have to have a Blue Sky account and still see some of the daily posting we're doing about soccer history. So hopefully we'll have some news on that end for you very soon. And then if you are an individual like us who likes San Diego and soccer and history, we're trying to get a team of volunteers to help us research some of these stories and help out for the shows. So if that is you, please go ahead and reach out, specifically to me, and you can contact me at john@bigpinedigital.com. All right, Dylan, any other final thoughts that we need to talk about or share or do before we wrap things up and do our final trivia question?
Not particularly. I'm gonna. You said there were some videos on the internet of old Puskás play, so I'm gonna have to go look at that. I've never
Yes.
bothered to do so.
I had not until this week, and I was very impressed with a lot I've seen in the movement, especially in his younger years, probably pre Real Madrid. It just so silky smooth and composed in the box. Really, really impressive. Or maybe the defenders were not that great at that time. I don't know, but it was still impressive.
You can only beat the team in front of you.
Right. Okay. Again, I hoped everybody enjoyed this week's episode that we did on Ferenc Puskás and when he came to San Diego. We'll be back next week with another episode where we're going to look at the one and only time that San Diego hosted a U.S. men's national team World Cup qualifying match. So that leads us to our trivia question here. San Diego has hosted a U.S. men's national team World Cup qualifying match only once. Can you name the year and the opponent? All right, Dylan, do you have any even remote guesses? We'll of course give the answer next time, but
I mean, I would guess
guesses.
Like no time even remotely recently. So I would guess like 1990s, 1980s.
I would say staying in the 20th century is a safe bet. It has not
there we
happened
go.
in the 21st century. So that's some kind of hint, but that still gives quite a bit of leeway there. But yes, it is definitely before, and not a little before, definitely before the year 2000. So we'll leave it as that in the 19 somethings. And then yeah, the opponent as well, but the year is probably the big one. That we'll look for, see how many guesses we get for that. So go ahead and don't forget to send in your trivia answers. You can put them in the community section there at YouTube. As we said, you can respond to Blue Sky. You can send us an email. Either way, we will reveal the correct answer on our next episode. And that wraps it up for us here. We'll see you next time on This Week in San Diego Soccer History.